Let me ask you guys, where was the speed of sound officially first broken? We're not going to talk about the jets over Germany that went into dives and may have broken the sound barrier. It's very possible, and I agree. But where was it officially first broken?
Here.
Right here. Only not here. Up there. Right above our heads. And everyone remembers who did it, and that was Jaeger in the X-1. Who was the chase pilot? Bob Hoover. Bob Hoover was fully qualified to fly that aircraft, and it was simply luck of the draw that Jaeger was chosen to fly on that particular day. But Hoover was also trained to fly the X-1, as were other pilots as well. But Hoover was the chase. And the guy who was the overall officer in charge of the program who flew the B-29, General Bob Cardenas. The amazing thing I find is that Jaeger, Hoover, and Cardenas are all three still with us. They're all in their 90s. And they all play an active role here at the museum, which is pretty awesome. So we still get to talk to them once in a while. Who did Mach 2?
Crossfield.
Crossfield. Scott Crossfield in the Douglas D558 did it right here as well. Okay. Amazing guy also. We, both Zapp and myself and most everybody who worked there knew Crossfield personally as well. And it was always a joy to have him come to our place of my former employment many years ago, and he would sit down and tell us the stories of flight test up here. Little did I know some years later I'd be here preserving his legacy as well. We've had the Crossfield family out here. We've had others as well. We recently had General Robert White, who we'll mention in a moment. So who did Mach 3? Mel App. Nothing's getting by this guy. But let me ask you, what happened to Mel App?
He died.
He died. He died a minute after going Mach 3. The aircraft, he decided to turn the aircraft back towards Edwards, and the aircraft went out of control. A minute later, impacted the ground. So who did Mach 4? Robert White. And 5, and 6. And eventually Pete Knight had the ultimate X-15 mission. Mach 6.7, yep. 4,250 miles per hour, all-time speed record. Is that the fastest we've ever gone? And that was the 1960s. But is that the fastest we've ever flown in a wing-powered piloted aircraft? Maybe. We'll let it go at that. So at the core of all this is Edwards, because everything happened right here, and this is why it's such a magical place. So as you walk around here, you'll see aircraft such as the very first F-22 sitting right next to you. It's the #1 airplane. In the far corner is the M2F1. Does anyone know the significance of the M2F1 lifting body?
Space shuttle. To get the right shape for a space shuttle.
Exactly it. That defined the shape of the space shuttle, the M2F1 in the far back corner. That was on a budget. It's in the back corner of the museum. That was designed on a budget, $30,000 to build that. That's it. It was built by a glider company. The outer shell was. The intersection was, the insides were built by NASA here at their labs down here. That proved that an airplane without wings could still generate lift, and enough lift to slow the plane down so it could land on a runway. That's what the M2 was about, and a whole series of lifting bodies to follow. But parallel to that, over here was X-15, the first piloted powered aircraft to fly into space. So we were flying into space years before the shuttle came along. But had there not been an X-15, there never would have been a space shuttle. So quite an amazing craft. 3 X-15s were built. One was lost. Mike Adams was lost on a mission, unfortunately. We have parts of his aircraft in the far back. All those missions occurred here. Pretty amazing stuff. They would load the X-15 on the B-52 that Zapp mentioned at the North Gate. That's 008. That's the original B-52 that launched many, 140 X-15 missions. That plane would fly up to northern Nevada to launch the X-15. The flight up there, I think about an hour and a half, 2 hours. When I drive, I go camping a lot. It's about a 2-day trip. So I drive my motorhome up there. It takes me 2 days to get up to northern Nevada, Utah. We love that country up there. 2 days to get up there. Take about an hour and a half or so for the B-52 to get up there with the X-15. Once they launch that X-15, that X-15 applies power. It would typically fly to a high altitude, conducting experiments, and then it would glide back to Edwards. What was the return time? Wild guess. How about 8 minutes? Yeah, not bad. Not bad. So was that thing cooking? It was moving. It was really moving. So that was an amazing series of flights, 199 powered flights of the X-15. And again, all of that happened right here. And much of the equipment used is still around. We recently took delivery of a lot of the original telemetry equipment, the primitive computers, the recording devices, the old reels, those things. They've all been sitting in a warehouse over here. So now the museum has possession of them, and eventually we'll rebuild an X-15 control room. Now, if I can only get a real X-15, we're working on that. Many of the aircraft we have here, again, are from here. Many stayed here following their mission. The prototype A-7 Corsair is parked outside, the #1. That airplane came off a Navy production line. The Air Force borrowed it, they tested it, they said, hey, we really like these, let's go buy 1,000 of them. And they did. But what do you do with the first prototype, which is in fact a Navy airplane? You can't put it in Air Force service. So it remained here as a test bed. And many of our aircraft, albeit they were prototypes, remained here as test beds, test vehicles afterwards. So the first F-4E Phantom prototype, the first E model with the gun, is parked outside. But that also became the first Wild Weasel prototype, and used also later on to chase cruise missiles around the sky. So many of these aircraft have a very long, interesting, colorful history, not just the fact they were the first of, but they stayed here for many years doing other kinds of test work. So our mission is to preserve that, to help tell the story, and to hopefully help get another generation excited about what we all love, everything about flight tests. So, shall I announce we're going to make a special stop?
Yeah, we can do that. Even though we're doing a special stop for you guys. It's not on our itinerary, but since almost everybody raised their hand, they saw the right stuff, and considering you came all the way out here to come to this museum, then go into Pima, we're going to make a special stop somewhere for about 15 minutes. It may cost us a little time, but since you guys aren't on a too hard a schedule, this is a great place. You'll see some unique test aircraft.
You'll be the only folks probably from your country that have seen these aircraft.
We're going to leave here, come out over here and look, and come up high and look at this lake bed, this huge lake bed, 44 square miles. We'll go do that next. That's on our plan. Then we're going to cruise around down here. NASA's over here. We're going to go there for lunch, but unfortunately their gift shop's closed. They're doing some work there. Then we're going to cruise around through here, look around, talk about the base, see who runs it and everything else, tell you about the infrastructure. Then we're going to cruise out here on a flight line, come all the way down here, make a special stop, and then we're going to head out this way toward the flight line, check out all the stuff that's going on, then head back out towards the gate and get you out there after lunch. So that's about that.
Summer days burn me out, love just brings me down. Go inside like windshield leaves that slowly leave the ground. Hey, you come back, I wanna give you a chance. Love me like you used to, so we can learn again. The skin is getting brown, baby, drink your night away. Maybe we will not regret it, you will not regret me. Laying down under the sun, burning love cause we are young. No one tells us what's done wrong, cause it's just me and you. It's just me and you. Yeah, it's just me and you. in you.
And this is where we're at. This is Edwards Air Force Base as we know it. Again, at 1933-ish time frame, Hap Arnold was looking to come out here. They started buying land on the East Lake Shore and were going to build Muroc bombing and gunnery range. They needed someplace from March Field in Riverside to come flying over the hill. It was a good mission run. It was a good test for the pilots. Go over the mountains, come over here and do a bomb area run over here. And that was on this East Lake Shore over here. Then, as we got closer to the war, we built Muroc Field, Muroc Lake Field. I think it was Muroc Field for a while, and this is where all that was happening. We got ready for World War II. We were training bomber pilots, fighter pilots, and this flight test stuff wasn't happening yet. So we get into World War II, again, training fighter pilots and bomber pilots here. This doesn't exist. All that was all ranch land. So this was Muroc Army Airfield. Then as we go into the late, after the war, we knew this was going to be the Mecca flight test. Hap Arnold, a lot of these forward thinkers were saying, my gosh, this lake bed is God's gift to the Army Air Corps and the U.S. Air Force. It is so flat. It only changes millimeters in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of yards. That's how flat it is out there. Do you have a question? No. Okay, I was just checking. You might jump in. And anytime you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll talk about it. But, so this was God's gift to the Army Air Corps. So again, this is, then we proceeded at the end of the war. This is where a lot of that initial flight test stuff all the way to 1955 happened here. This is where Jaeger took off in the B-29, came down, dropped, and broke the sound barrier. This is where Glenn Edwards and Major Forbes took off. Major Forbes was the pilot, Glenn Edwards was the co-pilot. We talked about that. They took off out of here when they were flying that one mission where they stalled and were killed. And about a year and a half later, we named the base after them. And then with all the turbojet revolution, you can see all the models on the wall. That's not all the aircraft we flew here. That's all the aircraft that flew their first flight here, either takeoff or landed. Now, if you times that by 10 or 15 times, we could put them all around the wall if we had those models. So there's a huge amount of aircraft we tested here, but again, they have to take off or land here to be on that little display. And then we don't have enough room for all the other aircraft that have flown for the last 8, 10 years. But anyway, so a huge amount of stuff. So this is where the turbojet revolution happened and everything else. But right in the middle of that, in 1942, we're training bomber and fighter pilots here. Way over here on the East Lake Shore, we'll see that complex today. That's where we tested America's first jet fighter aircraft. It was called a P-59 Aero Comet. It wasn't some high performer, but it was a great transition aircraft. Matter of fact, I don't think we lost one in test, but it wasn't that great a performer. Some of our propeller aircraft were still outperforming it, like the P-51 Mustang and things like that. So in certain regimes, the propeller planes are still better. But we knew right then and there the jets were the way to go. And matter of fact, about a year and a half behind that, I think, so 1942 we flew our first jet here at Edwards. Then later in 44 we flew the Lockheed P-80. We'll actually see a P-80 today, and it's the one we see today is the one that broke the transcontinental record in the 40s for a jet-powered aircraft for the Collier Trophy, I believe. So they were doing some of that stuff. So we'll see that very aircraft today, and that's a special stop. We're not really supposed to go there today, but I squeezed it in for you guys because we got hung up at the gate, and I can tell you guys are into aviation. So okay, so 1955 we supersized the base, so that's when it grew out, and we expanded with a very popular program we called Eminent Domain in the United States. We pushed all the ranches and everything else off our property, and that's how we got this big. One thing, there was safety. A lot of times in the 40s and 50s, we were crashing quite a few aircraft. It wasn't, pilots were flying 20 different types of aircraft. They can't possibly master 20 different types. They thought they could, but we learned later to reduce that down and then get an engineering team and have a control room backing them up. So then we went very regimented in the test process to where it is today, so we don't see hardly any accidents, even though the flight test business is very dangerous. So again, 1955, right here was these two giant hangars. We towed these over to this location right when we opened up this part of the base. If you want to see a good movie of what it was like at Edwards here, because this was Edwards Air Force Base all the way to 55, right here, Towards the Unknown with William Holden. If you can get a DVD of that, it's great footage. They're testing a XB, I guess it was a 53, or 51, a Martin aircraft. Very maneuverable in the B-52 range, but it was kind of more like a B-47 in a way, that kind of payload. But that was a great movie to see this part of the base when it was Edwards Air Force Base in action. And then right over here, there's an X-15 complex where we tested the X-15. And a great movie to rent for that is X-15 with Charles Bronson. And you can see this part of the base when it was new in the late 50s, early 60s. So it's pretty cool. And they're they're coming out here, taking off with the B-52, landing on the lake bed and all that. The story's a little hokey, but it's a great show. Okay, so here's our 3-mile long runway here, 15,000 feet long. So it's 3 miles this way, 300 feet across. So American football, every single football game in American football can be played crossways at the same time that happens on a Sunday. So when we have most of our football games, every single one can be played on our runway. Well, obviously they wouldn't do it because it's concrete, it's hot, and there's no stands. But you get the idea. That's how much space is out there. That's a lot of area down here. And this is a 12,000 foot runway we built as a temporary. Why this one was getting a new concrete, because from 55 it finally wore out, and we redid the concrete on this main runway. Unfortunately, you see this. A lot of times we'll do airliner testing here. We'll take off on, this is runway 04 right. We'll actually take off down this way and do VMUs and a lot of that slow takeoff stuff for airliners to document, to write in the manuals how much power do you have to use to get off the ground with this payload. And we do a lot of that. And so sometimes you'll see Boeing airliners back in the day of McDonnell Douglas, when I worked down there, we'd have MD-11s taking off and barely clearing the lake bed and flying around at slow speed, minimum power, or rotating all the way back. And we had a skid plate. We'd rotate on the skid plate and just barely take off and figure out the minimum amount of power to take off. And that's what we write in the manual. So a lot of that data is in the flight manuals that the pilots fly off of. So we do a lot of that work as well. But Boeing comes out here. They came out there with their 777, 787, their 737 wedge tail that they delivered to Australia, the kind of AWACS. So they test a lot of their aircraft here. 747-800 was out here. So we do a lot of that work. Size-wise, to show you how big this is, here's the museum right here with all the aircraft. I can cover it up with the tip of my finger. So all the aircraft, this building, all the ones out there, covered it up with just a pad of my finger. So pretty huge.